This is 151 KRFH. My name is Ayrton Flaherty, and you're listening to Debate the News for Saturday, May 23rd. Joining me via Zoom is my co-host, Dr. Aaron Dawson. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Ayrton, it's great to be back. Our guests asked us to read the following land acknowledgement, so we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the land of the Wiyot peoples, which includes the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. Arcata is known as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. The persistence of the Wiyot peoples to remain in relationship with these lands despite their attempted genocide compels us to spread awareness to our inner and extended community regarding the true history of this space. We strive to hold ourselves and others accountable for the continuation of colonial acts, which neglect to include the voices and needs of these tribes while remembering to lead with compassion. We'd like to welcome our guests. We have several people with us today. We'll start with you, Dr. Kaitlin Reed. Professor Reed, thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and then briefly the guests that you brought on our show today?
Yeah, ayukwe, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I am Professor Kaitlin Reed. I am an assistant professor in the Native American Studies Department at Humboldt State University. My research tends to focus on environmental conflict, tribal land and water rights, and I am an enrolled member of the Yurok tribe. I am also a Hupa person and Oneida person as well. So I'm really excited that we have several HSU students who are incredibly involved with this project that we'll be talking about today, and I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name's Amanda. I'm a senior in environmental sciences with a minor in Native American studies. I've been working on the Food Sovereignty Lab project since November of 2019, and I'm really stoked to share some dialogue with everyone here today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Tully. I'm a graduate student in Environment and Community at HSU. I just finished up my second year working on my thesis project, which is regarding land return to the Wiyot tribe. And I also was involved with this Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace project from its inception in the fall of 2019. And I'm so glad to participate in this radio show today and talk about this project that we have.
Yagali Du, Echelon Cody Henrikson. Hello, my name is Cody Henrikson. I'm a marine biology and Native American Studies undergraduate here at HSU. I'm also an enrolled member of the Ninilchik Village tribe, and I'm a student researcher on this project as well as a member of the steering committee for it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evie Ferreira. I'm a recent graduate from Native American Studies, Environmental Studies as well, with the minor in Ethnic Literature. And I'm on the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workshop Steering Committee as well. We have started this project in November, I believe, is what Amanda said. So last semester. And I'm happy to be here to speak with all of you.
Well, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you very much. We are here to talk about food sovereignty today. We've got two segments. We want to take kind of a general look at the issue, and then we're going to dig in more specifically to what's going on at Humboldt State in our next segment. You have some active hashtags because this is something that you folks are working on here in the community, so we'd like to make sure folks are aware of those. Those are hashtag HSUIFSL, Indigenous Food Sovereignty Lab. Once again, HSUIFSL. HSU NAS Lab, Native American Studies Lab, and then hashtag stay home but not silent, because it is quite possible, perhaps necessary, that there may be some external support needed to get something like this taken care of. So you sent us some media that we'd like to listen to give us a little bit of context on the relationship between some of these groups and the food that we're talking about. So we'd just like to take a quick listen to some of that, and then we'll ask you a couple questions about what food sovereignty is and what you're trying to do. So let's take a quick listen to some of those media bits.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I study environmental sciences at HSU.
Hi, I'm Evie. I'm studying Native American Studies, Environmental Studies, and Ethnic Literature.
Hi, my name is Daniel Holzapple. I'm a recent graduate of Humboldt State University with a bachelor's in Native American Studies.
And I'm Carrie. I'm a grad student in the Environment and Community program.
We're here to talk to you today about the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace.
The purpose of the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace is to provide Native and non-Native students, faculty, staff, and community members with a connection to Indigenous knowledge. The use of the lab would reinforce the integral roles of traditional Indigenous land management practices, and they promote human and eco-cultural health in California and beyond.
With challenges of pandemics, climate change, and all other environmental justice issues facing our world, food sovereignty is crucial. Food security is an issue in many rural and tribal communities. A lack of access to healthy food choices leads to long-term physical and mental health consequences. Life revolves around food. A strong food system allows for strong community.
We recognize that social and environmental justice are not separate issues, but rather are deeply interconnected. By centering on Indigenous methods for achieving food sovereignty and security, the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace provides access to techniques for tackling these issues. It is a space for creating community, allowing Indigenous and non-Indigenous stakeholders to collaborate on solutions and develop food security.
By creating a space for people to learn how to establish and maintain respectful, reciprocal relationships with nature, we increase visibility for Indigenous peoples and their cultures in the public sphere. It is vitally important that we shift away from disciplines that have historically focused on the study of Native peoples to ones that focus on learning with and from Native people. By doing so, we advance the restoration of traditional land management practices and promote healthy communities and ecosystems. Thank you for watching this video, and we need your voices of support. If you could please record a short video on your phone or write a letter that says you support the Food Sovereignty Lab and email it to arm159@humboldt.edu by April 30th at midnight. We could use all the signs of student support we can get. Thank you.
So we listened to that. So I guess I'm just going to start asking, just based on that, why is, to Dr. Reed first, why is food sovereignty important? Yeah, why is it necessary, in our society?
Thank you for that question. So I will give a very, very basic surface level explanation, and then throughout our discussion we can kind of complicate that. So essentially, food sovereignty is a group or community or nation's ability to define their own food and agricultural systems. Right, so that you get to have self-determination over what foods are being produced, what foods are going into your body, right? How those foods are marketed, distributed, given, right? And so it's having control over that food system. And so I'm going to kind of go back a little bit and kind of talk about some of the history of colonialism or settler colonialism here in California. So there is this misconception that Native peoples were just wandering around, kind of walking around in loincloths, grabbing berries off of different bushes, right? In reality, especially in California, Indigenous peoples who have been here for thousands and thousands of years had very sophisticated, well thought out, because we had a long time to figure out what works and what doesn't work, right? We had very sophisticated and complex food systems that required ecological management. So one of the things that's really important to know about California Indians is that we lit everything on fire all the time, right? Ecologists are slowly figuring out now that hey, we should probably burn forests. This did many things. It prevented fuels from building up, so we didn't have catastrophic wildfires. But one of the most important things that controlled burning did was that it dramatically increased our food production systems. And so a lot of the plants that are native to California, when they're exposed to this heat, they will more acorns will happen, right? The things will bloom better, bigger, provide more. And so we need to understand the foods that we would eat as tied to ecological management systems, right? And so when the settler state shows up in California, right, they, one, take land, but two, they simultaneously supplant our ecological management regimes with their own, right? So they create the U.S. Forest Service. We're not burning the forest, right? We're clear cutting it, right? So this dramatically decreases food production that Indigenous peoples within California would have been dependent on. So one, it's tied to our ecological management regimes. The other important thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about why Indigenous food sovereignty is so important is our relationships to our foods, right? So today, right, we understand foods as commodities. I can show up anywhere I want and I can buy something wrapped in plastic from halfway around the world. And it's probably going to be dirt cheap, right? For us, our foods weren't commodities that were of void of significance or relation or measured solely in their monetary value. So I'm a member of the Yurok tribe. And so our elders always tell me we are salmon people. And so our creation story talks about when Creator put salmon in the river, right? He made people so that we could steward that environment, and that like salmon would then be able to take care of those people, right? And so we think about salmon as relatives or ancestors, right? And so if we're thinking about like justice and what that looks like, we're not thinking about justice just for human beings, right? If we understand our food as relatives or ancestors that have agency, they also need justice. For me, that doesn't look like fisheries, right? That doesn't look like offshore salmon, like gilt nets, right? That are like the size of football fields that are picking up everything and we're sending them all to China, right? Like we have to treat our food relations with respect. And then there are numerous other reasons food sovereignty is important, but I'm going to let some of the students kind of tackle this issue as well.
Thank you, Kaitlin, for that, and Aaron. I think what I would really like to add about the importance of food sovereignty, especially in a historical context, is that we need to understand that historically settler colonialism attacked our food systems. It was very much a part of how we were colonized as indigenous peoples. Commonly they say, 90% or more, whatever, indigenous peoples died from disease. Well, that number totally negates that those people died of disease because they didn't have their food systems that supported them anymore, or they were moved off of lands or something like that. And then we also have to recognize that those diseases in themselves actually come from poorly managed food systems. Like smallpox, which historically has decimated indigenous populations, actually came from cowpox, which comes from poorly managed livestock. And so to understand why food sovereignty is so important is to understand our history as a people who have been colonized, where our food systems are specifically targeted to make us more susceptible to these regimes. And so it's about self-determination. It's about our right to exist. And that's very much its resistance in itself.
Several histories have talked explicitly about how the United States government targeted the food systems of indigenous people as a way of getting them to vacate their land. And obviously settler colonialism is a fundamental part of the problem. And you've identified kind of the way that settler colonialism has led to kind of commodification of food. Can you talk just a little bit more about, the kind of harms that come along with this issue as far as how they impact everyone? Because settler colonialism definitely impacts everyone, right? But food sovereignty and the kind of problems we have with food right now as a result of settler colonialism is a question about food for everyone in the community. Is there anyone that wants to speak just a little bit more to kind of, the way that capitalism in particular has made this a real crisis for some people? Yeah.
I can share just an initial thought. Ecologically speaking, right, we cannot continue to eat the way we do, right? Meat production is worse for climate change than all of the cars in the globe, right? We did not so California Indians, we did not have domesticated wildlife, right? That's to kind of go back to Cody's point in terms of disease. That's one of the reasons California Indians, as well as other native peoples, get so sick, is because Europeans let pigs in their house, right? They lived in very, very close quarters with livestock. Whereas California Indians, we were more about game management, right? We would create large prairies in forests through controlled burning. And so we're smart. We don't want to go chase elk. We're going to create prairies so elk come to us, right? So ecologically speaking, all of the food, there are so many foods that exist in California that could sustain us. The reason they don't is because we prioritize cattle production or sheep or hog farming, and they eat a lot of the foods that we as California Indians would have ate, right? And so when we're thinking about Europeans coming in, right, they are dependent on this rhetoric that Native people are primitive, that we are uncivilized, that we are savage, that we couldn't possibly have fathomed a complex and sophisticated food management system, right? And so part of that is there are lots of reasons they think they're better than us, but one of them is that they eat meat, right? And so when like they start the missionization system here in California, like they don't want to go without ground beef or whatever they're eating, right? And so they're bringing a lot of livestock with them, and then that means that those foods, that their food system is effectively destroying our food system, because like they would call us diggers, because we would dig out roots and tubers and prepare them. And so in some ways, so there's this great scholar, his name's Kyle White. He's a Potawatomi and he's at the University of Michigan, but he essentially argues that settler colonial ecologies had to be inscribed into indigenous ecologies. Right? And so he's looking at the ways in which their capitalistic food production system effectively renders ours impossible, right? And then this is another side issue that we might dive into, we might not, but as native food, like as native knowledge is becoming hip or trendy, we see these people who want to appropriate indigenous knowledge without operating by our protocols. Right? And so now we're in this sticky situation when we share with people, hey, we actually used to process acorns and we would make acorn mush and it would last us through the winter. Folks hear about this and then they show up and they take all of the acorns, right? Because there's still this underlying notion of like individualism, accumulation, and wealth production, right? And so it's not as if you can just take indigenous ecological management practices. It's also about the worldview and the way you understand these different foods and what their role is, right? Is it to profit or is it to like sustain your body, right? Because you can eat too much, but you can never make enough money, right? And to me, that's like the crux of the issue, right? It's one of worldview as well as one of like ecological management practices.
I would like to speak to the commoditization of food too, and in my mind, a really good example of that is just the nutritional value of these foods. Mm-hmm. You know, you look at indigenous foods; they're packed full of nutrients, and there's literally studies that when indigenous people eat these foods, there's regions of their brain just light up that are not seen when you eat, you know, anything else. And it's like a very good example is wild rice. Mm. Wild rice is an incredibly nutritious grain that when grown wild on the lakes, you know, in the Great Lakes region, it's incredibly nourishing. It's why those people ended up staying there, the Lakota, I believe. And then, you know, you take studies that look at wild rice that has now been cultivated and grown in, you know, mass productions, it automatically loses a high value of nutritional value. So when you have the commodification of native foods into, you know, capitalism, it's the same story we're fighting here with everything else that, you know, you have a capitalism that's trying to sell these foods to make money, not to nourish you. You know, there's nothing in these foods besides for them to get $1 out of your pocket. It's not the community that we base our food systems on, that, you know, we work together to get these foods, that it's a part of our culture. You know, it's not just sustenance for us. It's a way of life.
I can't think of a better word than worldview behind the food production. Like when you read the studies about how like food manufacturers in the United States go to great pains to find the exact dosage of sucrose to just get people hooked on that food. There's a great study about how Cheetos are like this magical combination of dissolving and addiction to just get people to consume more of these. And it's definitely not because they're really good for you. It's definitely not because they're life affirming. It is exclusively because it adds a great big fat bottom line to whatever conglomerated interest it is that owns the Cheetos brand at that particular time. And that's just a very different approach to food than the systems that y'all are talking about. I just wanted to, go ahead.
And just to go off of that like food scientists developing like the most addictive flavors ever, that produces quite a large challenge for tribal communities, because on top of this, many tribal communities meet the definition of food desert, which means there are not access to nutritious foods within the vicinity. And so, like, when we're talking about food sovereignty and wanting to get tribal communities to kind of go back to our traditional food systems, like, if you have a 6-year-old that has had Mountain Dew or mustard before, right, like, acorn mush is never going to cut it, right? And so, like, there is something to be said about that chemistry, right? And like colonists have been using a lot of tools to separate Native peoples from culture. Like, why not food science, right? And so that definitely makes it very challenging. And then also think about advertising, right? Like, who's going to want a bowl of acorn mush when you just watched a commercial for like a tripped out cereal mascot, right? And like the way we can use imaging, marketing, as well as like brain chemistry to get people to continue purchasing these types of commodities.
We talk and debate about how the Supreme Court has said that tobacco companies cannot advertise directly to children, but they don't do anything for food manufacturers. And we look at like McDonald's and, you know, even cereal and just the level of sugar that goes in and the implications being things like diabetes, which is pretty significant when you talk about the relationships to disease and stuff that you were mentioning. You know, again, this is a global problem because in many instances, these food deserts are created. They're induced, right? They're kind of like a competitive interest here.
I think there have also been studies that show, like, within urban settings specifically, that like food products will be like significantly more expensive in like Black neighborhoods or Latino neighborhoods than they will in like the corresponding white neighborhoods, right? And so it's also like what bodies get access to nutritional foods and what bodies need to continue to feed this like ridiculous food production regime, right? And so like there's clearly an issue of justice here.
Yeah, it's a documented tactic of like redlining. It's a documented tactic of racism. Food is a kind of fundamental component of this that we don't see addressed too often, but that's something y'all are working to fix. Sorry, Ayrton, I think I ran over you there.
Oh yeah, you're good. So Kaitlin, so now like based on like how you've explained like how integrated our societies with settler colonialism, and how can societies in general start moving away from settler colonialism and capitalist societies to make it more indigenous friendly and other instances like that?
Well, I think the most obvious one is land return. We're all on stolen land. If we give it back, Native peoples can manage it in ways that will produce food in just ways. And so, like, that's the big one. I don't know if there are other like smaller things that people want to bring up, but for me, like, there's no, like, you can't, to me, it does not make sense to like rectify the symptoms of settler colonialism and ignore the structure, right? Like the problem, like, so there's a great scholar named Clint Carroll. He wrote a book on environmental governance within the Cherokee Nation. And he writes every single problem you could fathom in indigenous communities, whether it's like diabetes or whether it's poverty or whether it's mental health issues or domestic violence or like lack of educational outcomes, it all comes back to land, right? And like our degree of our relationship to it, right? And so for me, it's really kind of silly to talk about how you're going to achieve social justice or environmental justice while you're standing on stolen land, right? Because like if we're talking about justice, we need to return things that have been stolen, right? And I'm not saying that like immediately our food systems will come back better than ever, because like Mother Earth has taken a huge beating by settler colonial society, and she also needs to recover and heal. But I think it's important that we conceptualize that process of healing, right? Like Native peoples have been separated from our indigenous foods, and that presents a profound like cosmological violence, right? And so we need to heal from that, and simultaneously, like the land itself has like has been dealing with a lot of shit, right? And she also needs to heal simultaneously. And so the way I conceptualize it is that our people heal simultaneously as our earth heals. And so the thing I tell everybody is like Yurok elders always tell me, as long as our river is sick, our people will never be healthy, right? Because salmon aren't going to be healthy in a sick river, right? Which they go directly into our bodies. And so it's about understanding the interconnection between all of us. And if one element of that equation is sick, everything else is going to be sick too, right?
Amanda,
so land return.
Yeah, Amanda, you said you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, everything that Dr. Reed said about land return is first and foremost in this kind of how food sovereignty is going to, heal us moving forward. But for a lot of people, a lot of Westerners, they can't conceptualize what land return looks like. And so I recently started working on a farm here in Arcata. For settler people, they're white people, they work on a farm, they care a lot about the land. And we dive into a lot of good talks about what it means to actually care for the land and what kind of crops you're actually growing. And a lot of farmers all across the United States will spend a lot of money tilling up a patch of ground that's growing a weed. And maybe that weed is invasive. It was brought here by European settlers, but that weed is also like a food source that could feed, people who are hurting and don't have food. So like a wild radish, for example, farmer will spend a lot of money tilling up that wild radish and then plant something super exotic like cilantro. Where did cilantro come from? And I just think there needs to be systematic shifts in the way we think about what is food and where does this food come from, and who's actually, who's working with the food to get it to the places. And I think that's kind of like my 2 cents of, working with the land and then working with the actual people who are, producing this food, and what are their values? What is their gain in working with the land, and further how we all heal when we do work with the land. Indigenous or not, you're working with Mother Earth, and that's your source too. That's where you came from too. That's my 2 cents.
Carrie, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's been providing such incredible information and insight on these topics. I really value listening to everyone. So regarding this specific issue, like to me, all of what we're talking about, returning lands or like food systems and food sovereignty, it's all and everything really, society, the way that we exist, it's all about connection. And we could not we couldn't do anything without being connected to ourselves, one another, and to the land. And so it's important, I think, for me to think and to really center Indigenous voices in every instance that I can, because they constantly are reminding me that it's about connection to the land. And so that's why land return, I think, is so very important, and why it's central to my thesis project. But you see oftentimes, Westerners and this kind of this mentality of constructing more things to fix these issues, quote unquote issues that we have, that we're facing today. For instance, building dams or building, giant wind farms or whatever it might be to fix these problems that have been created because of settler colonialism. And we're kind of just continuing to push the problem further and further out, as opposed to addressing it head on and saying, you know what, this stuff that we've been building isn't working. We need to rebuild this connection with the land and with ourselves so that we can truly understand how to move forward in an effective and healthy way. So to me, connection is so central. And I know that I don't feel okay unless I'm feeling connected to the people and the places around me. And so I just wanted to bring that very simple concept into the conversation.
Thank you, Carrie. I know, Aaron, earlier you were asking about what can people kind of do. And I think really kind of one of the really important things anyone can do is to really start to look at your own food systems in your life. Look at what do you eat? Are you getting anything from the land? And then also you have to remember that it's not taking from the land. It's a reciprocal relationship. You don't go, like Kaitlin said, and take all the acorns when you learn how to make acorn mush. No, we were never taught that. You take a few things and you tend that land. So if people are looking for something to do, that's really the first step in food sovereignty is really self-determination. Go out and pick some blueberries in the mountains, or huckleberries or blackberries, there's so much food here in California. There's so much food. It's ridiculous, and that's really the first step is educating ourselves and, our friends and families and people close to us. And, what better way to do that than over food?
catch some salmon, you know, and share it with a friend and talk to them about that salmon, about how that salmon is, you know, I'm a salmon person too. My people were salmon people. Those are our ancestors. You know, every time we get a fish, we are thankful for it. And you consider everything that has gone into that fish's life. So really, if people want to, you know, light that fire, that's really where it all starts.
I think that one of the important things that we've heard in this segment is just kind of echoing what Carrie said about trying to center and refocus our attention on Indigenous voices. A lot of, you know, we talk a lot about the kind of bad arguments that we hear. This is debate in the news. After all, it's not just what's going on, but what are the arguments about what's going on? And, you know, you hear all of the time people, it's a studied discursive tactic in settler colonialism to say Indigenous nations have been wiped out. There's nobody left. We don't know what to do. When this is just patently false. These, as the land acknowledgement mentions at the top, these nations survive. They exist and they're here right now telling us what to do. We've got a whole segment next about like what specifically we can do here at Humboldt State, so and in our community. So we're just really, really excited to kind of dig into that. That'll be great.
So, yeah, so once again, if you want to get connected with this project, you can follow the hashtags HSUIFSL, hashtag HSU NAS Lab, and the hashtag Stay Home But Not Silent. So this is 151 KRFH. You're listening to Debate the News. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. This is 151 KRFH LPRK Radio Free Humboldt, and you're listening to Debate the News for Saturday, May 23rd, 2020. My name is Ayrton Flaherty. Joining me via Zoom is my co-host, Dr. Ann Dawson. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ayrton. It's good to be back.
We have had a great conversation with Kaitlin Reed and other members of the NAS Food Sovereignty Lab. They're all working on this massive project. So, Kaitlin, would you just quickly introduce everyone again, please?
Ayukwi. My name is Professor Kaitlin Reed. I'm an assistant professor in the Native American Studies Department, and I'm a member of the Yurok tribe.
What's up, everybody? My name is Amanda. I'm a senior in environmental sciences, and I have a minor in NAS, and I'm stoked to be here engaging in this dialogue with everyone.
Hi, I'm Carrie Tully. I'm a graduate student in the Environment and Community program at HSU and a member of the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace Steering Committee.
Yaghalidu Echelon Cody Henrikson. My name is Cody Henrikson. I'm an enrolled member of the Ninilchik Village Tribe and a member of the steering committee for the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Lab here at HSU.
Hey everyone, my name is Evie Ferreira. I'm a recent graduate from Native American Studies, Environmental Studies with a minor in Ethnic Literature. I'm also a member of the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workshop Steering Committee. And stay tuned, we're going to share a lot of good stuff with you.
Thank you all for joining us. We had a great conversation last segment, just generally about food sovereignty, what it is, what the problem is. Y'all sent us a little bit of media about what your proposal is here at Humboldt State. You've been working for some time now, it seems, to get a food sovereignty lab up and running. Folks that are out there that are listening, that are interested in this conversation, there's a few hashtags you can be made aware of. Hashtag HSUIFS Lab, Indigenous Food Sovereignty Lab. Hashtag HSUNAS Lab, that's Native American Studies Lab, and then hashtag Stay Home But Not Silent for pending action that's coming up.
Kaitlin, what is your team? What is the team proposing?
The HSU Food Sovereignty Lab would be the first food sovereignty lab of its kind in the entire country. This project is especially unique and special because it is entirely student created, and it has been driven by student efforts and student activism. This project emerged out of a course in the NAS department taught by Professor Kutcher Brisling-Baldy. The course is entitled Indigenous Natural Resource Management. So quick plug, if you are interested in working hands-on on the Food Sovereignty Lab, please take, is it NAS 325? Is that the course number?
331.
331. Is that right, Carrie? Yeah, so it is Indigenous Natural Resource Management, and this project actually emerged from the students taking that course in fall 2019, and so I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. I'm going to let the students tell you about what they created.
So I guess I'll start off here. So this project really kind of came about through discussions in our class of us being like, well, what do Indigenous students need here on campus? And that conversation actually started to grow larger into just kind of like, what do students really need here on campus? And what we really started to talk about, and like we decidedly did community participatory research on this, where we actually went out into our community with students, Indigenous practitioners, Native leaders, faculty and staff. We actually went and asked them, like, what do you want to see in this university? And we got, a multitude of answers. And, through everything we compiled, we developed this Food Sovereignty Lab, which, as we saw, was a project that would encompass all these things that people saw as issues in our university, like issues of food access, ability to make medicines or practice your culture, or just like if you're hungry. And we all started bringing this baby out. And this also comes from the fact that historically, this Native American Studies department in Humboldt State was actually supposed to have a food sovereignty lab. It was actually built and created into the Native American Forum at the BSS at HSU, but that was then taken away from the Native American Studies department through a bunch of like really messed up stuff going on, trying to cut the department in any way the university can. They took it away and they turned it into a hilltop marketplace. So a capitalistic endeavor that failed miserably. And when it did fail miserably, they shut it down, and it has stayed vacant for over a year. And then there's just this space that was supposed to be, a food sovereignty lab. So we're like, hey, let's put a food sovereignty lab back in there. And so we started this process again of applying for it and everything. And as a class, we put all this paperwork together. My associate Carrie and I actually presented this research to a statewide student-led research competition, and we won. We placed second place in behavioral studies at a graduate level, and we won. And so we brought that back. And I guess if anyone else wants to keep going with this. Carrie, you want to say something?
I would love to. So I just want to make it very clear that, yes, this was a Native American Studies course that we took. We did interview mostly Native students, faculty, staff, community members, tribal members locally. But this project was intrinsically interdisciplinary. We are the group of students that designed and that is now implementing this program are from across 12 majors and from all over the globe. I mean, so it's challenging now in the situation that we're in with campus and that we've experienced with campus, which somebody else can probably talk about a little bit more. But I did want to just mention that we come from everywhere and we want it to be for everyone. And that is like the purpose and like the soul, like, with food sovereignty, it's not just for Native peoples. It's not just for one specific group. It's for everyone. Everybody needs food security. It's essential to survival, whether we know it or not. And I think it's the only way that we can make it in the future. And so the purpose of this is really of the lab is so that people and students and community members and anybody can interact with Indigenous ontologies so that they can leave academia and advance into their careers with the understanding that everything is connected. And so there's, again, my just need to say the sense of connection is vital. And especially in this, socio-ecological pandemic, the pandemic that we're in, don't know why I have to make it more complicated than that. We are in a global crisis. And so it's more important now than ever before.
A crisis that's really challenging our meat production, is challenging all of our food production in a lot of ways. Thanks, Carrie. Kaitlin, did you want to get in on that?
Yeah, I wanted to just briefly talk about space. And so in the first segment, we really underscored the relationship between the ability to access our traditional foods and land, right? And so when we're talking about why Indigenous peoples don't have access to our foods, we have to talk about land dispossession. And I see a lot of the same arguments and the same rhetoric that is employed by the US federal government when dealing with federal Indian policy as I see the institution. And so the space that we're talking about is actually really, really important. So the BSS building, the Behavioral and Social Sciences building, was originally constructed to be a native space on campus. The first floor of BSS is modeled after a traditional house of Northwest California tribes. The official name of the space is the Native American Forum. And part of this history, in 2015, Humboldt State University students had to occupy the Native Forum just for it to be called the Native Forum. Right? So when BSS is constructed, it's under this pretense that it is for Native peoples, it is for Native programming. And then what does the settler state do? Mine, right? And it takes it, right? And so the fact that we have to continue to fight for space and speaks volumes to me, and it parallels this history of the state so well, right? And it's we're fighting to maintain and hold on to space at every possible moment. And so for me, the reluctance of the institution to pursue this project that is clearly beneficial for all students, especially during a time of global pandemic when food supply systems are literally breaking down, and the institution still won't give space to Native peoples in a space designated and intended to be Native space, right? And so for me, this is symptomatic of a much larger set of problems. And I just wanted to briefly state that about the space we're talking about.
We briefly chatted over the break about how while y'all are working on this, you have to dedicate your time and fight on your own volunteer hours. And meanwhile, McDonald's gets to put up billboards wherever they want. And Evie, did you want to jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, just to add to what Dr. Reed was mentioning, that as HSU faculty and students are reflecting on the initiative, to consider that using a phrase such as, what if so-and-so would like that space? Instead ask what happens across campus when there are cultural centers and labs? How inclusive has it been, and what has occurred in building of those relationships? Because I'm pretty sure departments don't go out to other departments and say, all right, we're ready to have this space for our own use. So it really is, I think, also to connect to something Dr. Reed said earlier, this is a place to learn to not appropriate. This is a place to build relationships, to understand what trust means as we move forward. And even within our own classes, we've gained insights from a lot of visitors that come and talk about what it means to harvest acorns and what it means to respect, to learn about acorns, but not to necessarily use that as all right, we have a complete answer to resilience or climate change. No, this means use our brains, use our minds, come together and understand what it means to appropriately build those relationships, including what does space mean.
Cody?
Yeah, I think really what Evie's talking about community is, it's really why we're all here. And I think we kind of jumped into this conversation before really fully describing what happened is we've actually applied for this space that was originally intended for this at HSU. We applied for this last fall, I want to say, and we did not get an answer for months. They actually decided on it in February, but didn't tell us. And it was through our own persistence of being hey, what's going on? What's going on? Amanda must have sent a million emails. She's amazing. But we finally found out that we were denied, but their language wasn't denied. It was, we were not requested for approval or something like that, which is, it's the same rhetoric, and we're told, this space doesn't meet the criteria, you aren't following this. It has to be a space accessed by all. It's well, if you read our application, it quite literally says that 20 times.
If you read all the videos of support we sent in, the letters of support, that like huge amounts of documentation about this project, what we've been working on, who supports it, that never gets put into these proposals. Never. We went from the beginning, we've been going high and above and beyond. People don't do research projects to like design these things, and like inherently a biology department just gets a lab. They just get one. And so we're like, well, we want one. And, we've had the president approach our department, telling us, what can we do to indigenize HSU? And so we developed this proposal, this HSU Food Sovereignty Lab, and we're trying to pay for it, mind you. We're trying to do our fundraising. We're trying to bring funding to HSU for this. A project, like, they don't do that with labs, that comes directly, that money, from the university, but we're actually proposing to have funding for it. We've been applying for grants. We have numerous interested parties. We're actually already receiving donations, but we were denied, and then so we got caught in this loop of being like, oh, you can reapply in the fall, but you have to meet criteria that doesn't come out until next spring. And so it's like we were put in this like trap. We were told, oh, no, you can reapply. But then it was literally made impossible for us to. And they kept citing things like COVID-19, even though they decided on this well before. And it's like, we're actually in a time where because of COVID-19, you should decide on this more. We're talking about issues like literally students are waiting in line for free bags of food at HSU every week for upwards of an hour. I'm one of those students. And so like we got denied. And so we've been fighting this process. And, I think Amanda can actually speak to a lot of this part because she was very involved in like everything we had to do, but we had to really start diving into policy and like looking at all the bylaws of the Senate and everything, and really finding out that they were straight up lying to us. They were telling us there was this process, for appeals, and then they would say, oh, but there's not. And I would like to let someone else, I don't want to monopolize this segment, but I want to hear from, definitely say something to this.
I do want to hear from Amanda on this. I just wanted to point out that Carrie, who worked with you on that presentation, apparently that y'all won an award on. Is that correct? She kind of mentioned in the chat that while all of this runaround is going on for your space, they're like, putting y'all on social media and celebrating your accomplishments. And it's a word that we use a lot in criticism, which is the term is lip service, which is where we get a lot of talking about how much we like a thing. But when it comes time to actually put the institutional resources down to like structurally support that thing, suddenly the conversation is very strategically evasive. And Kaitlin, you mentioned how you weren't explicitly denied because that would give you access to an appeal. You were effectively deferred into the future, which can happen indefinitely. Didn't want to run over Amanda's chance to talk about some of this process. So feel free, Amanda, go ahead.
Thank you, Aaron. I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there. They're lip talking, they're spinning our wheels, not wanting to give us this chance to appeal. But I wanted to move away from all this bureaucratic nonsense because yes, we did get stuck in this loop, and yes, we are a very dedicated group of students who will do this work. We are the research assistants. We are putting down our energies to jump through hoops, and we will come out on top, and we will see this space return to the Native American Studies Department. So I wanted to offer some envisioning of what this space will actually look like, because I think some of our listeners are like, what is this lab? And Evie spoke, this is a place to learn, not to appropriate. And then Cody was talking about how the biology department can get a lab anytime they want it. And so the NAS lab, the Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace, is going to be this room, a lab that operates like any other lab on campus, that has a set schedule of registration online where you could see where it's accessible, when a class is in there, when it's being used. We plan to have community like work days where we invite practitioners from the United Indian Health Services, local tribes, the Yurok, Wiyot, Hoopa tribes, Tolowa Nation, to come in and work with our community at HSU, not only our students, but our staff and faculty and people surrounding our community, to learn about food sovereignty, the lab space will have large work tables to work with basketry materials and have running water, because you can't make a basket if you don't have running water. And that's one of the things that we found in our first phase of our research, is that we just need this space to work with these materials and to invite people to this space to, help educate our students and our staff and our faculty about how not to appropriate and how to appreciate and, actively work towards bettering our future, for the students who don't even know they're going to come to Humboldt State and get their minds blown about what it means to be, an environmentalist, for lack of a better word. I'm not a fan of that word, but HSU likes to market that word a lot.
Yeah, it's environmental sustainability is a big part of what they do at HSU. They talk a lot about Indigenous representation at HSU. Cody's saying maybe we could talk about the Senate meeting. Evie, I'm not sure if you're trying to get in or not either. Did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I think it is very important to realize that envisioning the Food Sovereignty Lab is to acknowledge each step that a lot of students have already initiated on and off campus. And that's why when we reference all those letters of support, it's really to give voice to the not just ours, but full-on personal and community collective learning and growth. And so, yeah, I think it'd be wonderful to see what others have to say about the Senate meeting or such. Yeah, thank you.
Where we're at going forward, I think, is what folks are saying there in the chat that we should share with the listeners. Yeah, Carrie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we did just have, I think, 6 presenters regarding the Food Sovereignty Lab at the most recent Senate meeting, which was last Tuesday.
I think we're up to 8.
Were there 8?
Because we had the WIAT there, we had Kutcha.
So there are a lot of us that came to present, and Cody did just bring up a really amazing aspect that we would like to thank the WIAT tribe for allowing Adam Cantor to speak on their behalf. His words were very moving and quite a call to action. I really, really appreciate everything that the WIAT tribe has done in support of this project, and everything else, of course, that we continue to do to work together with them on multiple projects. But the words that the students and Kutcha and Dr. Visling Baldi and the WIAT tribe offered quite literally stunned the Senate to the point where a motion was made to just offer us the space. I think that it kind of got to the point where everybody was just like, why are the students having to experience this? Let's just give it to them. And so a motion was made. And then there were several senators who felt that process would not is not effective, and it doesn't make sense. And it's like, there isn't a process for this. So how can we just do this because it's allowing this group of people who have, this argument against, an HSU committee to kind of bring their doubts to the table, and then we just vote on it. So a lot of people had concerns with this process, and so the motion was actually rescinded, and there was not a vote on providing us with the space. I do want to say that as of right now, where it seems that we stand is that the U.S. FAC, which is the University Space and Facilities Advisory Committee, which is the committee that we had to submit the application for the space to, is actively working with us to get us to the next step so that we can start to apply for funding, so that we can start to make plans and reach out to community members in order to move forward with this project, which is something we greatly appreciate. And I want to say, that this process of getting us to this point in no way should be disregarded. We put so much time, effort, blood, sweat, tears, literally. I mean, taking time away from my child, people taking time away from their final exams and final projects. Some of these students that are on the call today are just finishing school, like college, their last semester. And so it's very important to recognize all of the hard work that we put in to get us to this point. And I think we all kind of feel a little bit relieved knowing that we are in this position right now, and we can start thinking about the bigger picture and how to move forward. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm sure somebody else would like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. What I wanted to really add onto what Carrie said there about the Senate meeting is that, we have all these people, all of us getting up there and having really emotional testimonies. At one point I broke down a little and was almost crying when I was talking about salmon. And then you have senators who are just so vapid in talking about process. They're like, oh, I support the things behind this, but this sets a precedent. We can't just do this here and that, when people just demand things. A professor that comes to mind who actually said some very insensitive things to us was Mark Wilson of HSU. He was so concerned with how us coming to the Senate was all about it was inappropriate because there was no process for things. Well, actually, that was described in their bylaws, that our appeal was to come to the Senate directly. So you have all these senators who don't know their own laws coming up telling us no. We had outstanding support overall, but you have those one voices that stick up, and they're very loud. They're very strong and bold. It looks like Evie wants to say something on that too.
Yeah, I think personally it's very exciting to hear about the historic student efforts to unsettle HSU norms because there are so many amazing faculty and students and intergenerational efforts to show us how cultural revitalization, language programs, all these wonderful practitioners in the area who, as Carrie stated, either showed up at the Senate meeting or have provided letters of support. So we're prepared to unsettle situations because we know that as you're asking and inquiring, who's donating already? What kind of projects are already being furthered in this concept of the lab? So we're very thrilled that we showed up to that Senate meeting, I think, to hear.
Thank you. I just want to chime in very, very quickly. I think that frustrations the students are feeling speak to much larger structures and sort of the inherent fragility of tribal sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is as a legal relationship with the United States and the federal government, between Native tribes. We depend on the United States federal government understanding their own treaty obligations many a time that it doesn't happen, right? Simultaneously, these students depend on this committee to understand their own bylaws. These students depend on this institution to understand their own policies, and when that doesn't occur, justice can't happen. Also, I think this focus on protocol is a cop-out and a way to be yes, we support the justice for people, but it doesn't abide by these regulations or these policies as if they weren't written by those same exact people, right?
Yeah, the process is a well-studied form of evasion, and what we learn when we study it is that that's not the rules, is typically a closure to a conversation for, non-empowered groups and an opening to a conversation for empowered groups. So when Amazon wants to come in and it's against the law, we start creating workshops to create proposals that can build better business in the area, and that allows Amazon to come in. But when folks like you show up, they're just well, that's not the rules, sorry, and it just ends the conversation. So, yeah, it can be very frustrating.
So, Kaitlin, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm wrapping up, so if you want to get a last comment in.
Last chance, Cody.
I guess I just want to say that while we did have some voices of, negativity and everything, outstandingly, we get support for this project. Everyone we talk to about this is heck yeah. You want to make food security a thing? Yeah. So I think that's what's really important to take away from this. Yes, we have a lot of frustrations, everyone's going to in the activism work they do. But what really propels us forward is that everyone we talk to about this is for it. Even those voices in the Senate that got up, they were I support these ideas. So I just want everyone to understand that we feel very supported in the work we do, and it's why we continue it. we're very passionate peoples.
So Kaitlin, I think we're just gonna quickly wrap up. What can like we've heard all these, we've heard the proposals, we've heard what you all are doing to achieve the Food Sovereignty Lab and get it. What can listeners do to help you guys out on this?
There's a lot of things. One, you can demand from your institution that we put forth this Food Sovereignty Lab, right? Like an institution as like the university is a corporation. They view incoming students as like profit, right? You are revenue, right? And so if their revenue demands that something exists, right, that impacts administration and institutions in a way that like activists on campus, like we're already enrolled, right? They've already got our money. So in some ways, you are more valuable to this effort, right? And then the other, if you are able, right, we would love it if people can donate to the Food Sovereignty Lab. This committee that is like giving this space, right? They are demanding standards that often aren't applicable to other groups, and they want us to demonstrate that we have all the necessary funding prior to even approving our space request. This is something that other groups on campus do not have to do. And so to be able to ensure the future of this project, we need to demonstrate that there is financial support. Right? I know a lot of us listening are students and we don't have the means to be able to donate large sums. That's cool. Give us $1, right? Like if 100 students like made donations, right? Because every single time a donation is made, it is processed, regardless of what the amount is. And so people look at the amount of donations being made, not just the amount of that individual donation. And so I am sure they'll make the website available, but I will just briefly share it. It's alumni.humboldt.edu/giving/NAS. And we would also ask that if you have this, if there's space when you do this, please write specifically that your donation is for the Food Sovereignty Lab. If you just like donate to HSU, that doesn't mean it's going to the Food Sovereignty Lab. So you need to be very explicit of where you want your funds to be used.
One more time, that's alumni.humboldt.edu/giving/NAS. And it is earmarked exclusively for the Food Sovereignty Lab, for those of you that are out there that want to donate.
I did want to jump in here too. Another thing people can do is we are doing a social media campaign where we're trying to get pictures of support. So even if you can't donate, we are very happy just to have a picture. You know, we're having people, you can make a sign, and we're really trying to use the hashtags here again, the HSU IFSL, the HSU Indigenous Food Sovereignty Lab, and then the hashtag HSU NAS Lab, and then the hashtag Stay Home But Not Silent. And so that's also gonna, you don't even have to actually post them and tag us. We'll get some information where you can send them to us, and we're like gonna have like a collage, you know, of support and stuff, you know. So anything we can do where we can have shareable content is really amazing right now too.
And if you are an HSU student and you are very interested in this project and you want to get in on the ground floor, I strongly encourage you to take NAS 331 in the fall semester, and you will have an opportunity to work towards the completion of this project.
I'd just like to add too, reach out anytime to ask questions about food sovereignty, biocultural sovereignty. We are always happy to share what we've learned. So I think that's really important to give story to the process. And also, like Dr. E was saying, getting involved is by asking questions, and we're happy to share what we're learning.
Okay, so this is thank you all so much for coming on to on and telling us about this project. Like this will clearly, if assuming we can get more support behind this, will be hopefully this will be able to revive HSU and give this amazing resource to the community. So thank you all so much for coming. This is 1051 KRFH. You've been listening to Debate the News for Saturday, May 23rd, 2020. We're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.